Hello and welcome to the eTech podcast with me, your host, Ryan Morn. I have been involved in the development of electrified vehicles and machines since 2005 as an engineer and a business leader. This podcast is the product of my passion for electric and autonomous vehicle technology. I'm here to share knowledge from some of the world's leading experts, as well as my own insights. Join me as we accelerate the transition to cleaner, safer and smarter vehicles and grow the industry around the world. And for today's podcast, I'm joined by John Conafay, who is the founder of a really interesting company called Integrate. And John's very kindly agreed to come and talk to us about himself and what they're doing. So welcome to the show, John.
Thanks so much for having me.
So maybe, as has become somewhat customary, we could start by finding out a little bit more about you. Could you tell us about your background and where you're from?
Yeah, originally from Washington, D.C., United States, and yeah, went into the U.S. Air Force, did communication navigation mission systems on AWACS, and then went to school for economics and design, actually. So not a classically trained engineer before going into the space industry, because I found a club called Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, and kind of went all in on that club. Fell in love with the space industry, came for the technology, stayed for the people, and then went on to work for 5 different companies over the past 12 years, $3 billion startups where I worked directly for the founders or very close. And everything from satellites to rockets, and was on business development for federal and commercial operations, supply chain, procurement, everything that a person on technical hire does at very fast growing hardware startups.
And you must have had because you sort of have a sort of partly technical, but then was there a reason why you kind of went from the sort of techie into studying, you said economics, didn't you?
Yeah. So I've always been fascinated by technology. When I was like 14, worked at a movie theater until I could save up enough to get microphones to start recording local bands, and then would record local bands rather crappily with those 2 microphones, but they would pay me and I would just put that money back into building a studio. And so I loved the business side of doing all of these things. I really loved all of the science and art behind recording and technology behind recording specifically. So built that up and then started a record label actually when I was 17, right before finishing high school.
As you do.
Yeah, I was really, really heavily invested in the local like hardcore and metal scenes in North Carolina, DC, Virginia. And it was like, I can't play anything for the life of me. I don't particularly love, performing, but I always have loved the business side of things and actually doing the doing background part. So it's kind of been a theme throughout my life that I wanted to do the business side of things, and always fairly entrepreneurial. And then when I was leaving the Air Force, I was reading Fortune and saw the list of Fortune 100, and I saw all the CEOs and what they majored in college, and it was economics, engineering, economics, engineering.
Yeah.
And I was like, there must be some fundamental truth to this whole economics shtick. So I wanted to go into that, and then eventually got sick of just being in business school and missed all of my music nerds as I would walk through the design school, and got pulled into a class with someone who would later become my mentor, and so did economics and design.
Okay. It's a really interesting combination. I guess then, given that little background, the question probably should have been, why did you join the Air Force?
Yeah, good question. So I refused to join the military growing up. I'm a 3rd generation vet. My granddad was World War I. My dad was Vietnam, Silver Star, 3 tours there, and he always wanted me to go into the military. It was like after high school, because I was not an easy kid by any means. I was bit of a jackass, and in and out of a bunch of different schools and all these things. And he was like, Johnny, just go into the military right after high school. You'll get the discipline that you need. It'll be the right choice. And I was like, absolutely not. And then after I crashed and burned with the record label after about 2 years, I was kind of doddering around and not figuring out what I wanted to do. So I needed a swift kick in the ass, and decided to go into the Air Force. Unfortunately, by that time, we'd had a lot of loss in our family. So being a Marine or going directly into combat was not exactly the best choice.
Yeah. Okay. But you survived a few years in the military?
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, it was, for all intents and purposes, it worked. I got the swift kick that I needed and a significant amount of discipline to go to school afterward.
Yeah.
And then that discipline really unleashed the ability to focus on building things, which I had the opportunity to do with NSEDS, and that's how I got my foot in the door with the space industry.
Wow, okay. Cool. Well, thank you for that introduction. So after that sort of early professional career through some bigger companies and then some startup businesses, you came to a juncture and decided to set up Integrate. Can you just tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So I worked for 4 hardware-specific startups. So Spire Global, interned at Spire Global very, very early on, was building ship tracking, plane tracking satellites, now public. And then Astranis, building micro geo telecommunication satellites. It's a really spectacular company that's doing really great now. And then Spaceflight, which is what brought me up to Seattle, and then ABL Space Systems on the rocket side of things. And every single company, I had all these inflows from vendors and supply chain, all this, but I would then have to synthesize with our technology roadmap and our engineering teams internal to the company. And then there would inevitably be these outflows to our customers or government program customers and things like this. And there was no good software that allowed you to interact with the external world. So you could do all these really great road mapping and tasking and requirements management internal to your company. But then when it came down to communicating all of this to the external world, which you have to, hardware is inherently collaborative. No matter how vertically integrated you are, you're dependent on somebody externally. When it came to that external communication, it was back to dissecting schedules into Excel, sending them via email or text message or something like this, and then having to re-ingest all of it from all these disparate sources. So with Integrate, we wanted to build something that allowed you to collaborate as seamlessly with external organizations as you would internally.
Okay. And that's so the fundamentals of the business and hence the name Integrate. But what does it do? What is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally fair. So it's program management software for the world's most ambitious machines. So think Microsoft Project, Smartsheet, Jama, Jira, all packaged into a single system that allows you to scale from 5 people all the way up to 500,000 if necessary, and do all of your tasking, your milestones, your timeline and technology road mapping, your systems hierarchy and requirements in a single platform that we think is very, very beautiful as well, because it's one of the only program management software that's been built in the past 20 years, roughly.
Oh, that's interesting, because a lot of listeners of the show will be practitioner engineers and will use tools like Project and Smartsheet and Jama and Jira, and particularly Jama, for functional safety sort of V model development sort of programs. It's pretty cool tool, but they're all different. They're all different platforms. So you've brought that all together basically into a unified system.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing we saw with so many of these different systems, is that none of them spoke to each other well. And so you have this kind of ephemera that's surrounding what the product actually is without the product at the center. So we wanted to put the product at the center of program management.
Cool. And almost a loaded question based on our previous discussion before the show started recording, but we're allowed to do that. Are you aimed at a particular industry or not aimed at a particular industry?
Yeah. So we started, for better or worse, in the space industry, because that's where my background was. That's where I initially saw the problems. And it was supposed to be initially for putting small satellites onto large rockets, because you had to handle so many different requirements, taskings, and milestones to put a single satellite onto a large rocket, much less 30 to 150 onto a single rocket. So it's just massive systems engineering issue. And so that's where we started, and we got a lot of our unique perspective until some engineers at very, very large organizations were kind of beating us over the head saying, what the hell, this is the program management software we've been waiting for and needing for decades. Why don't you expand into other industries? So yeah, now we're in automotive, maritime, soon be in hoping to be in renewable energy in a big way. And yeah, we've expanded well past the space industry since.
Excellent. It's an interesting place to start because of the sort of high degree of technical sort of specification-led, program-led, and like I say, lots of interaction between supply chain partners and kind of the launch side, and you can't be late.
Absolutely. Yeah, it gives a very, very interesting perspective on time, because you have a very complex machine being designed and built right alongside a different complex machine, the rocket and the satellite, and maybe one's not actually developed. In the case of SpaceX, it's developed, you know what you're getting, you know when it's going up, all this. But with some of the small sat launchers, they're facing their program risks, you're facing your program risks as you build spacecraft. So it gave us a really, really interesting perspective on time that seems to be resonating with a lot of other customers as well.
I can imagine that, my background's automotive, as many of the listeners will know, but that must make an automotive kind of hardware project seem pretty trivial by comparison, or do you see a lot of similarities? How do the different sectors compare?
So automotive actually seems substantially more complex because of the scale of it. With space industry, we're starting to see scale with things like Kuiper and Starlink and all this, but that's still 3,300 satellites, not 330,000 cars. And those satellites also, for the majority of cases, aren't human rated. They don't have to carry people, so the safety and compliance is a completely different ballgame. So, we made a big bet that the majority of hardware industries, whether it's medical devices, consumer electronics, automotive, etc., had so much overlap in how they built things, and then there was only about 10% difference in the compliance and regulatory and difficulty. But what we found is just about, and we appreciate, is just about every industry thinks it's the hardest because you have such unique difficulties with that industry. With cars, it's scale and human rated, and then this transition to more of a platform technology where EVs are coming up pretty spectacularly, and so a lot of car companies are having to see themselves reinvent who they are. Yeah, I think it's all difficult. It's the core principle. It's just what flavor of difficult.
Yeah,
and we're trying to make it easier.
It's often difficult when you're immersed in an industry and immersed in your job to have an appreciation for the problems that the other guy has over the fence. And it's the expression "the grass is always greener" is very relevant, as he has the same problems that you do, but they're just different.
Or they're called something different, which is something we've had to learn a lot. Translating the same problems between different industries. It's remarkable how many different names there are for PDR or for the EVT process or anything like this.
Yeah, and everyone loves an acronym.
Exactly. That's preliminary design review and then engineering validation test, just in case.
Yeah. So in terms of then the industries that you're serving and the kind of the sort of back end program management and system software, do you see that in my notes? I've got a specific point of talking about some AI and machine learning and how that's used in industry and for doing the stuff that you do. So
talk us through that. How does that impact the kind of things that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think it's just the amount of data. I mean, machine learning and AI is spectacular for large data management and the ability to search through, where there might be risks that one person wouldn't be able to search through and identify, where there might be issues that were tackled in a different way 17 years ago. If you still have the data, the ability to parse through that and see, the similarities between various data sets or the massive differences, or, oh God, we forgot a gigantic requirement or something like this. So it seems strange to simplify it as, just data management, but that's where I see the most power coming from it.
And are you bringing those kind of features into your system, or are they are they already there, or are they some way off?
So we set up the entire architecture of Integrate to be able to take advantage of machine learning in the future, in that everything's recorded. So you have full audit logs of everything that you do in Integrate. And that actually didn't start as a feature for the customer. That started as our wanting the ability to go back through and, as people make decisions, whether it's behavioral or otherwise, be able to parse those out, pull those out, and display risks to our customers. So yeah, we absolutely intend to get there. I think we want to be much more measured and opinionated on what we do with that, because I think there's so much hype that just jumping into something without thinking about it can offer diminishing returns. But there are a lot of companies that have done it really, really well, like Linear and a few others.
And in terms of where your systems are being used, like in particular, I believe you've got some experience with things like self-driving vehicle development programs and things like that. What do you see of that sort of area?
As far as what we want to get into next, or how it's benefiting those areas?
Yeah, so like obviously developing an autonomous vehicle, for example, it's probably about as complex as it gets from a sort of a requirements point of view, safety, integrity point of view, and managing a program like that, I would imagine, is a bit of a nightmare. I've never done it myself, but I can having done a few sort of corners of that space, and it's ever evolving as well, as it's new and people are learning new things and stuff that works and stuff that doesn't work and things like that. So are you seeing people use your system that are working in that domain?
Not for autonomous cars yet, though we would really love to get into that. But it does bring up a really good point, and something that we're fundamentally trying to solve, which is the integration of software and hardware, which it seems like, oh, that's a solved problem. We have Jira. And if you ask any hardware engineer, generally they'll be like, Jira doesn't quite cut it for hardware, or sprints and Scrum doesn't quite cut it for hardware, because there are so many different drivers that determine your build and your schedule that go far beyond the limits of a 2-week sprint on the hardware side of things. But what we have seen people really interested in, and what we're doing, is combining the ability to have, if software engineers want to live in Jira, having that bidirectional talk with Integrate, so that hardware and software stay aligned throughout the entire development process. Because what you'll see sometimes with companies that have less developed MBSE or anything like this is you get to PDR or CDR, whatever stage of the design process you want. That's more of an aerospace term, I guess. And you lock in design and like, okay, this is the hardware that we're going to use, and so let's develop the software to this. And if you're lucky, you have a hypervisor or something like this to simulate that hardware. But if you're not, then software goes off and starts developing what they get. The rubber meets the road on supply chain on the hardware side. So a bunch of things have to change, or just physics gets in the way, and you have to change out a lot of the early decisions you made for the hardware. And then software and hardware come together at the next design meeting or technical interchange meeting, and they realize that the software design for the specific hardware that was decided early on doesn't quite fit anymore. So they get sideways, and then software gets blamed for being delayed and all these things. So we're trying to get hardware and software on the same page as much as humanly possible with Integrate.
Interesting. Yeah, it's always the software team's fault. And it genuinely always is the software. No, it's not. It's very difficult to manage, I always found hardware development, I mean, mechanical engineering programs are fairly easy to manage because you can see it. There's always going to be unknowns and things that you can't see. But in terms of how an engineer is developing a component, with particularly the advent of 3D CAD systems and stuff, showing my age there, the advent of, yes, I learned to draw on a drawing board with a pencil. You can kind of see it develop, and you can see the design develop. You can, do analysis on it as it's being developed, and sort of managing that process, I think, is quite easy to understand and quite easy to see. Electronics is a slightly different kettle of fish, where it's a bit harder, and you still can kind of have a very well considered sort of circuit topology and concept, and you can bring that together, and then someone goes off and lays it out, and they've made a snafu on the layout and it doesn't work for some reason. And tracing those things back can be hard, but it's still quite visual. You can still see, in terms of tracking how the layout guys are doing versus the schematic. You can track that point to point and manage progress. But the software, and particularly from my background, firmware elements are always much, much harder to sort of manage. And it, well, typically it's never actually finished. It always seems to be a bit like the roof of the Sistine Chapel. It's finished absolutely when the product's obsolete.
Yeah.
There's always something to do. And it's actually quite hard to control, measure, monitor, in my view. I mean, I might be completely wrong, and there's something that's amazing out there. But
no, that's that's absolutely right. I had to learn a lot about software development starting this company because I came from the hardware world and things were different. Everything was different, and there's just constant battle being waged between Agile and Scrum or Kanban, and all the different flavors of Agile. How you actually monitor progress, how small stories should be, all of these things, because you don't know and you can't know to a certain extent all the time. It's not just in hardware, and it seems like a constant struggle for sure.
And do you think sort of having a system like yours and allowing effectively those different domain teams to interact directly within the system, do you think that helps to make it a bit easier for people to collaborate and actually to measure progress?
Yeah. So a lot of what our application focuses on is accountability. One of the earliest decisions made was for this internal-external collaboration aspect to be as seamless as humanly possible, because I got sick of using software where I would have to set up an entire parallel instance of that software just to interact with a single external vendor, or I would have to set up a completely different project and do double work all of the time. And the early decision we made was to get rid of those processes, make it as seamless as possible to just share a subtask or a task with an external stakeholder without having to completely reconstruct your source of truth or your schedules. And why we wanted to do that was because so much of these internal applications feel like self-looking ice cream cones, where you're just updating for other teams on your team or other people on your team. And if you're a small startup, there's not a lot of accountability there. If you get out of your organization and you're actually working with contract manufacturers, vendors, suppliers, all these things, external, now you have a different type of validation, different type of accountability, because when you move your schedule or they move their schedule, it's seen in real time in the application. Things change, follow-on effects and knock-on effects from those changes. So there's just a completely different scale of accountability that we're hoping makes the entire process more transparent and a little bit more, if I say seamless one more time, call me out.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, because having used Jira and Jammer in the past, and Jammer, I do remember trying to get the sort of purchase requisition signed off in one of the companies I was working with for Jammer to implement it. And I was finding it very hard to sort of articulate to the senior management, what it actually was and why it brought a benefit to the business. And what I found in the end, they just kind of agreed. But then once we'd implemented it and we were able to show the kind of requirement capture and sort of, spec doc creation features, there was a aha moment of, oh, that's pretty cool. But then in practice, the thing that we found with Jammer is that you kind of do all that upfront work, and then you're off doing your actual project work and you're using other systems. And you only kind of tend to revisit the stuff that's in Jammer at those more formal reviews. So it becomes like a pretty, it's a bit like one of those things that you do it. It's really useful to have. It really helps you kind of navigate the risks. But then you it always feels like you're updating it after the event to sort of to get it straight for the design review the night before the design review is actually happening the day after, sort of thing, rather than it becoming a live tool in the process.
In continuous, yeah. We've heard that a lot, no matter what the requirements management tool is, that you just kind of set and forget. But requirements do evolve and they change, especially as you get new information, as verification tasks are happening, all of these things. So that's one of the biggest reasons we wanted to integrate the requirements with all the tasking and milestones and actual schedule. It's a little funky for a lot of our customers to have requirements on a timeline specifically first, but once they get used to it, they're like, oh, we're not revisiting requirements just at these, as you're talking about, we're seeing them up front every day, all the time, so that we can adjust as necessary as we learn new things, etc.
Yeah, because it is still, even with Jammer, I found it's still possible to kind of forget about stuff, and you end up with something that you get to a review point, you're like, yeah, we haven't kind of come up with a test plan to kind of cross off that particular spec point or something like that. And it's still, particularly on bigger projects where the Jammer model is very complicated, it's actually gets a bit difficult to see the wood for the trees, sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of your business and Integrate at the moment, you've been going now for a couple of years. Is that right?
Yeah, we started in June of 2022. And yeah, just been going just over 2 years now. Raised some money in that June from Village Global and a few other spectacular angels, and then raised about 3.4 million last year in August. And I've been just cranking right along, government contract as well as a number of commercial contracts. Definitely seeing a knee in the curve. In the past 2 weeks, we've signed tripled our customer account, which is really exciting, and hoping to continue on that path. And
I know a lot of times companies can't tell because customer confidentialities and stuff like that. But are there any particularly? Can you share any of that in terms of who some of those customers are?
Some of our early customers that are still with us, absolutely. So we have Nanorax, or Voyager Space, formerly known as Nanorax, who manages payloads on the International Space Stations. One of our biggest customers, ESAR Aerospace, building rockets out of Germany. And then there are a number of really, 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 really cool companies that I wish I could talk about that are all across a pretty incredible spread that have joined over the past 2 weeks that hopefully we'll have a lot of news about very soon.
Very good. And looking forwards, what's the plan for the future?
Yeah, we want to become synonymous with hardware development. So, if somebody says, "Hey, can I send you this on Integrate?" or "Hey, are you on Integrate?" We want it to be do I know how to do my job? Of course I'm on Integrate. Why wouldn't I be? In the next few years, and really just continue to improve communication. Saw a really great Bloomberg video about how the American manufacturing base is hitting an upper limit because of the technology used and automation and communication capabilities and all of these things. So we want to be a part of solving that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it is. I was in a meeting earlier today, and we were talking about a large American manufacturing company. And, it is a thing where larger businesses are very risk management driven, but it sort of feels like in a lot of cases that the risk management's got a bit out of control, where they're now kind of paralyzed because they can't do things fast enough. And in some cases, and actually a lot of publicity in Europe at the moment about Volkswagen, and they sort of talking about a big restructure and kind of replan for the business. And one of their big things is the speed at which they're able to develop and the investment that's involved in developing new products. But the more that you work with larger organizations like that and others, you sort of there's a huge difference, and not necessarily a positive one, where the big company sort of corporate culture is a lot of process that doesn't necessarily drive value, and you kind of wonder how they get anything done.
Yeah. It's I was out to dinner with a few founders the other night, and somebody was describing working for a large manufacturing company in the area, and how they were measuring everything in efficiency, and it introduced a whole bunch of robotics to the system. And this person was like, and I realized that these robots weren't actually doing anything to add to the business or adding any value. They were just kind of these shiny objects. And I was just like, have you read The Goal recently? And he was like, yes, it was exactly like that. We had, these shiny new toys that everybody was dedicated to making work, even though they didn't necessarily work for the company. And I think robotics has come a long way since this story and everything. But yeah. And we're measuring by all these goals that had zero value to the actual company itself. They were just sort of vanity metrics. Yeah. And I was like, I know you all have MBAs and you all were required to read The Goal. Go back and read it again. Yeah. It's very interesting. It seems like we go in these 30 or 70 year cycles.
I mean, even a few years ago in my old business, I remember dealing with a big car manufacturer. I won't say which one, but they had a big beef about, they sort of felt like their suppliers didn't do enough for them, and the suppliers didn't treat them well enough, basically, and their competitors got better treatment than they did. And in the time that we were dealing with them, in a pretty much 12-month period, they failed to add, despite wanting to do business and wanting to buy a particular thing that my old company made. In 12 months, we didn't get a supplier number, so we had not been added to their database in a 12-month period. And it was like painful weekly discussion about how we get the supplier number and how we do that. And they seemed to be chasing the same thing around and around in a circle. And yet, in the same time, one of the competitor companies that they were complaining about, we'd not only got the supplier number, we'd been added to their system. We'd started to do work for them, formally received orders, and we're kind of getting on with it. And sort of the contrast was like, well, you feel like you don't get treated well by your suppliers, but actually as a business, you're really inefficient. Like that kind of process. Yeah. The stuff like that, like adding a new supplier or raising a purchase order in a big company can take months, like literally 10 weeks to raise a purchase order. And you're saying, like, why? Why?
Yeah. We're running into that a lot, where we're going to up our minimum license count because some of the larger organizations have such a long process and take so much time that you sort of isn't worth the squeeze to go through all of these IT and compliance and regulatory processes, and then for a 15 license deal. So we're running into that a lot. Some companies are way better than others and get through it very, very quickly and efficiently, but it's interesting. I mean, it's all going back to the risk conversation. It's all risk mitigation, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of times I used to work with a guy who had this lovely expression about seeing monsters under the bed.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen some deep scarring from some large organizations and small organizations who, every company in the world thinks that they'll never be or have to deal with risk mitigation or any of these processes, and wonder say, we can completely change these processes and all these things. And the more and more I see, I've worked for startups and other companies, the more I see them all just kind of come to center, and it's for better or for worse. And there's some examples that absolutely don't do that, but it's definitely interesting.
Well, the good news is for you and for me is that's why smaller startup businesses have a place in the business ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Because we can get stuff done. So on that, just kind of looking at the time, we're nearly out of time, and appreciate that you have a business to run and have to get off. So we'll bring the podcast to a close there. So thank you very much for taking the time out to join us, John. It's been a really interesting discussion.
Cool. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.